Today's topic is about building big digital movements. We use the term big, but I'd like you to be thinking about what this means regardless of what size of charity you are, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in the discussions as well. So we're joined by Paul de Gregorio. Why do I struggle to pronounce your surname, Paul? It's really not that difficult. Um, Paul's founder of Rally and a leading digital engagement and mobilisation strategist. So um, most of you who work in the charity sector and work in digital will have heard of Rally. Paul's worked with organisations like Cancer Research UK, Refuge, Amnesty International, 10 Seconds Trust, Oxfam, the Labour Party, Greenpeace, WWF, the list goes on and on. I thought they changed their name to WWE, Paul.
Sorry?
I thought they changed their name to WWE.
I've not really seen that. I think that's a joke that I'm not getting.
Okay, it's okay. I'll sink in later. It's fine. Often a lot of my jokes tend to be like that. So, Maddie's looking at me like, "What are you talking about, Ross?" There's someone on this call. There's like one person laughing. Someone gets it. It's okay. Right, I'll shut up now, and I'll probably go on mute, and I'll hand over to Paul. And Paul will tell you sensible things about mobilisation. And we're going to have a chat. We're going to have quite an open discussion today. I'm really interested in a few things. Is about what this looks like at different scales. So what this looks like for the big organisations in the room, but also if you're a smaller charity, what does this mean for you? And also for those of you working in devolved nations, what does this mean for you compared to those working at a UK-wide or a national level as well? So I'll hand over to Paul just now and I will make no more wrestling-based jokes.
Thanks very much. Let me just share my screen. So I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then hopefully we're going to do 30 minutes of questions and debate and challenge. I have a terrible track record of doing too many slides, so probably when you get the slides, you'll see extra ones I didn't talk about, but I promise around about 30 minutes we'll be taking your questions. So thanks for inviting me along. Really happy to be here to talk to you all about digital mobilisation models. As you'll get a sense of as we go through the this kind of the presentation bit, I'm really obsessed about how we use digital techniques to kind of engage the public at scale, and scale is something we should talk about given Ross's point there about organisations of different size. And it's about driving engagement, it's about driving participation in change and like fundamentally driving action. Tiny bit about me, I'm Paul. I run an organisation called Rally. We help charities, campaign groups, and some and not all political parties mobilise support and turn it into action. We like winning. We do most of what we do online, but not all of it. I have Twitter, Rally has Twitter, we have a website. I won't say anything more about us as an organisation because that's quite dull sometimes, isn't it? So I'm going to cover three key things today, some theory and maybe a little bit of context about why we believe that a digital mobilisation model is one that organisations should be exploring, some examples, some quite big examples just to illustrate some key points given the time that we've got today, and then talk about the key principles of what a digital mobilisation approach is and how you can start thinking about your approach to it within your own organisation. Like I say, 30 minutes from me, 30 minutes for questions, and I think questions in chat would be a great thing to do. So this concept of mobilisation is one that we at Rally are super focused on, and we're focused on it, I think, because of the definition and because of what that means in terms of how we've interpreted charities can engage with it. So mobilisation, the action of organising and encouraging a group of people to take collective action in pursuit of a particular objective. We focus in on this mobilisation mindset because it accurately sums up the approaches to public engagement that we think charities and campaign groups should be taking. The mobilisation models we advocate fuse fundraising, comms, campaigning, and advocacy offers. They kind of fuse those things together and create opportunities for the public to engage at a level that suits them and their own circumstances and the energy that they have at the time that we reach them. So it's not about engagement over fundraising or fundraising over anything else. It's about realizing that people can support an organization in a variety of ways and structuring the way that we look to attract support to really kind of take advantage of that. We have a couple of principles that kind of underline that thinking as we develop mobilization strategies, as we work with clients and we work with people who want to test out these approaches, it's super critical that, you know, the organizations who start looking at these approaches have this fundamental belief that people have power, and that unlocking the power of people, the power of the mass, is key to driving change. So we obviously think that human beings are incredible, and we see our role in the charity or campaign group ecosystem to promote approaches that seek to prove to people that they have power by giving them confidence, skills, resources to use it, and then kind of lighting the path for them to kind of hopefully bring them in to use their power with us, the organizations or the kind of campaign ecosystem, to make the changes happen that we want to see. We've also got this belief kind of around scale, that engaging the public at scale is critical to drive that change. We want to kind of create these programs which seek to really bring in as many people as possible who share the values of the organizations that we're working for, all the things that they stand for, and that bring people in at a scale which can bring around the change that's needed. But what we don't necessarily mean is huge $1 million ad spend scale. We're talking about scale that is relevant to your size, the size of the issue, the coalitions that you may be in, and the change that you want to make. But I think the important bit about scale and digital mobilization is the approach says you find stuff that works, and then the whole point of finding those things that can work is that then you have the ambition to scale that and roll it out and make a bigger kind of impact. Just a little bit of context around the sector about why we think that these models are worth looking at. So, like, before COVID struck, I think the charity sector was going through quite a serious kind of period of self-reflection. I think there was a sense that disruption was coming, but not really a really clear sense of where that disruption was going to come from, that kind of digital disruption. So we had this kind of, you know, these facts which we've borne out by data, that donors were getting younger, technology changing us as a kind of species in terms of how we communicate with each other, how we do all of the things that we need to do in life. We were kind of doing more and more of those things online, but I think more importantly, kind of changing how our expectations of our interactions with the brands we buy from and the kind of causes that we support. But also this sense that traditional advertising or kind of communication channels were not as effective as they once were. And that wasn't to say that, you know, brilliant direct mail or brilliant TV wasn't brilliant, more to say that if we looked at how brands and campaign groups were spending their money, increasingly more money was being spent online. Now, obviously, COVID meant kind of huge shift. And I think, you know, I have talked about this for a long time in other spaces, but fundamentally, if we look at what the pandemic has done to society, we are just more online. More online than we were a year ago. So how we school our kids, our leisure time, commerce work, these types of meetings we're doing today, that's just had this huge kind of disruptive impact. And given that it's kind of 2021, the kind of key part of building big digital movements is digital. So we're communicating with people where they are, and obviously where we are in 2021 is online. Again, loads of data points to support this, but I think I'll just keep it to 2 for today. So we spend a huge amount of time online. So this UK study, which came out in, I think, January this year, kind of clocks us at 6 hours, 26 minutes, average daily time spent on the internet from UK citizens at age 16 to 64, which is an incredible amount of time. So if we're going to be successful, if we're going to change the world, we have to be at our best in the digital space. There's kind of no excuses anymore about kind of resource or all the things which I know get in the way of providing kind of superb digital experiences. If that's where people are, to be relevant, we have to be there as well. And then there's so much data which shows off this kind of change in public behavior in the UK, but I come back to this quite often. It is monthly data from the Office of National Statistics that shows the percentage of all retail sales that are made online going back, I think, to 2008. We can see the general trend is growth. We can see the little burst every year for Christmas, and then we get to the beginning of lockdown and we see this huge increase in the percentage of retail sales which was online, which would be absolutely to be expected because of the lockdown situation. The point I would make is that, you know, it's very clear that the pandemic has been one of those kind of huge moments in terms of changing society, because what I don't think is going to happen to this line is it's going to return back to sort of December, November 2019 levels. I think there's this moment has happened where, like, it's in terms of how the public are shopping, there's been a massive change, and there are kind of data points across all different levels of how we use the internet, which makes the kind of which supports that. Other kind of context which is important, I think, as a sector, we talk a lot about silos. So we talk about the problems caused when we have various public facing teams, so comms, fundraising campaigns that have slightly different objectives, budgets, and methods of communicating. We've talked about these issues for so long, it's just kind of time that we've fixed it. I'd argue that the future successes and the future relevance of charities will be kind of driven by the success or failure of dealing with this kind of issue of silos, because a digital mobilization approach really does demand quite radical collaboration across multiple departments, budgets, and accountabilities in order for the public to get a kind of uniform, to get a consistent experience of you and you exist online. And I see both ends of the spectrum in the work that Rally does. We see organizations who've completely nailed this and have this kind of radical collaboration, one team approach. And I still come across organizations who have this sense of even competition between those various public facing functions for space in, you know, in terms of media spend online or kind of prominence in email journeys and things like that. And it's just it's an issue which always gets in the way of effective digital mobilization. Another kind of sector thing which I think we should be thinking about when thinking about these mobilization approaches is, I think for a long time, the sector has really doubled down on and focused on this concept of what product do we want the public to buy? So whether that's an event participation, a campaign action, or a fundraising product, kind of a lot of attention and energy has been used to use products as the thing that brings people in. And maybe what we haven't done is put enough focus on what we want to achieve, what our mission is, what our values are, and use those elements to be the thing that draws people close. So when we think about mobilization strategies, we're a huge advocate of kind of values-based attraction strategies, where we're using our values as a magnet to attract everyone who shares them, or as many as a large proportion of the population as possible who share our values. And then what we're doing is finding the most appropriate thing for them to do as we communicate with them over time, which of course could be money, could be time, could be voice in terms of amplification. But using our values as a magnet to attract everyone who shares them, I think, is quite a central component of any mobilization strategy. I think it's important just to dwell very briefly on the concept of slacktivism. So it's quite a derogatory term. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of the term, but it's kind of this term that's used to suggest that these kind of micro acts of digital solidarity aren't meaningful. I just don't engage with that. I don't really buy that as a thing. Someone a lot smarter than me said this, which I think it just kind of neatly sums up how we should think about digital acts of solidarity, which are more likely to activate those people who are inactive than deactivate our most active supporters. And I think that's the way that we should be constantly thinking about how we use some of these offers online. And also, really, really importantly, I talk a lot about digital, but mobilization is something that happens in real life as well. And what we've seen over the last few years is a huge number of kind of digital mobilization moments in the kind of movement space, which have inspired people to turn up and take action in real life. We've seen it with the Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen it around climate strikes. We've seen it around the murder of Sarah Everard in London, in terms of that huge outpouring of support and people turning up in real life. So jumping into some of the theory, the kind of two key principles that sit behind digital mobilization, which I'd like to spend just a little bit of time talking to you about before we show you some examples. The first one is engagement. Lots of organizations talk about engagement, seeing lots of fundraising and comms teams kind of merging or rebranding as engagement or supporter engagement teams. And I suppose the key thing for the kind of approach is that it needs to be real, needs to be authentic, and has to be much more than a rebrand. I like this from the Mobilization Lab, an organization which I'd urge you all to Google and delve into their resources section. They're a really, really great resource for some of this thinking. They talk about engagement as being the real catalyst for change. So long-lasting radical change needs both broad and deep engagement with the public. Broad engagement is achieved via the thing we're talking mostly about today, mobilization, because it's mobilization which gives us breadth. It's how we activate and grow an audience in order to kind of harness the power of mass. And then deeper engagement is achieved via organizing on the ground, kind of community interactions, and organizing is the thing that gives us depth, and it's how we build long-term structures based around people to deliver our vision. What I'm seeing as these kind of practices are optimized is the kind of blur between mobilization and organizing starting, there being a real kind of closer connection between those two philosophies. I love the Greenpeace engagement period as a way of illustrating this. It illustrates the various types of engagement as well as the overall goal of Greenpeace's engagement approach. Now, obviously, pyramids get a really bad press in some quarters. I kind of struggle to understand why, as it's just a kind of simple tool to show a theory. But in this case, the Greenpeace engagement pyramid is designed to articulate a way of operating, thinking, and setting of their goals. So on the left-hand side, leading, owning, contributing, endorsing, following, and observing. And what I really like about the way that Greenpeace have structured their engagement kind of approach is that in the sections contributing and endorsing, those are the kind of, that's where the products are, or that's where the transactional actions that form the core of what most charities do or offer the public are in those sections. And what's at the top is this concept of leadership or ownership, and it's that kind of that desire to move people into positions of leadership so that they realize that those kind of transactional relationships aren't the thing, that they're massively important, but they're not the thing that's actually going to bring around that huge change. So by putting money and action in the middle on the way to leadership rather than the destination for all of their engagement activity, the pyramid just kind of shows us the volume of people we would expect to get to the various stages. And it's kind of that point of real change happens in communities when Greenpeace successfully inspire people to those leadership and ownership positions where they're investing large amounts of their own time and social capital in supporting Greenpeace deliver on its goals. The other concept that we should be thinking about when it comes to digital mobilization is movement building. Lots of charities talking about movement building at the moment. I think looking enviously at some of those movements I talked about a moment ago, because they've managed to kind of really capture the imagination of the public in terms of Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and other things. For what it's worth, I don't think it's possible for any single brand or charity to start a movement. I don't think it's possible for an organization or a charity to kind of stick its logo on a movement and claim it as its own, but knowing where you sit within an overall movement so you can harness its power is super, super, super important. But I do think there are things we can learn from movements as we apply them to our digital engagement activities. And the kind of 4 key things I think that we can learn from movements and apply to successful digital mobilization of these 4 things. So think about really successful movements of the past. They've all got a very, very clear vision to believe in, well articulated, very visible, very easy to understand, and easy to see a part of yourself in. They all have a believable plan, again, visible, well articulated, believable plan on how the vision is going to be achieved. They have values that the public can subscribe to at scale. And when I talk about values, I'm talking about those values of those really, really kind of high level, easily understood values, which kind of the mass can see them, that are part of themselves in. And importantly for charities and campaign groups, the things that we ask those people that we attract to do are useful and valuable, but also really firmly rooted into that believable plan. Because if I'm going to invest like social capital into some form of movement or campaign group, then I want to see that believable plan, and I want to be given things to do that help achieve the plan. So in terms of a very, very simple mobilization model, I'll just run through this and then show you some examples. So we have this kind of attraction phase where we're using our values and our mission to bring people close who care about the same things that we do. They have the same view on the world that we do. So we use a range of different content or different campaigns or different themes in which to kind of attract, to kind of grab people's attention and bring them close. There's this moment of conversion, which is when we're presenting a series of low bar actions, or another way of thinking about that is easy doors to walk through that enable people to show that they want the same thing that we do. And it's that moment where we're creating, where we can kind of exchange contact details, mainly email, but in some cases kind of mobile, WhatsApp, or in other channels. And then we create experiences for those people in terms of the communications that we send them, where we're continually presenting them a range of high and low bar actions that are absolutely rooted in our mission and goal to kind of engage and re-engage them in the main kind of the thing that we are looking to achieve, whilst always having a really clear sense of what those high bar actions are. So those high bar actions could be turn up in real life, visit an elected representative, vote, register to vote, you know, a big fundraising gift, turn up, send messages, those types of different things, but having a kind of clear sense of where we're moving people to. What we don't want is a kind of experience where all we're asking people to do is retweet the tweet that we think is our most fancy. So I want to show you some couple of organizations who are doing this brilliantly. So first one I want to show you is, excuse me, Bernie 2016, great example of Bernie of digital mobilization, and it once felt so new, but it was actually kind of 5 years ago now. The reason why I include this story is that I'm lucky enough to count the chap in the middle with the laptop as a friend. His name is Kenneth Pennington, and he was the digital director of Bernie 2016. And he and I did a big presentation on movement building at the Barbican IOF thing a couple of years ago. So what I'm about to show you comes from his bit of the presentation. So it's straight from the inside of the campaign rather than made up. So Bernie Sanders was running against Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination for the President of the United States to run against Trump. As you can see from the polling, Sanders started nowhere. He was like widely believed not to be able to not to be a candidate that was going to have any chance of success. But as you can see from the polling, he eventually lost. That's not the story here, but he really the campaign really closed the gap on the Hillary campaign. What was central to that was big fundraising, big organizing. So from a big fundraising perspective, they raised over $230 million. 95% of it was raised online, no corporate money. All of that was raised from individual American citizens. And this big organizing function, which was, they basically had very low levels of staff on the ground to fight the battles. So they had to do all of their organizing online and kind of make and get people invested in the campaign in that way. In terms of how they drove that scale, they kind of, their mobilization program, I think, focused on two really key things, which I wanted to show you now, which was this concept of values up front and this concept of we, not I framing. So when I think about like values up front, the best way to show you that is to show you the homepage of the Bernie campaign that was running for the majority of his nomination run. And fundamentally what it's showing is that there was a kind of debate within the team about whether the website was there to showcase policy, to talk about the candidate, to do all the things that traditional political campaigns have done. But the digital team wanted it to be the place where you could use values to kind of drive as many people as possible into the email list. So they came up with this concept of this really quite peculiar kind of call to action. Nobody who works 40 hours a week should be living in poverty. But it was found to be a statement which resonated very, very, very well with the people who they wanted to attract to their campaign. And so running this was the way that they really helped to build their email list. Another thing to think about is how they framed their communications. So on screen now is the email that Hillary Clinton sent her base on the day that she announced her candidacy for the nomination. And what we see is, if we highlight the specific framings, is there's just kind of I, me, my framing, which is more about the candidate, or the are, we, us, you framing, which is more about the kind of bigger group of people who are looking for that change. And in the Hillary email, there's very, very little green and a lot of red. If we look at the same email sent by Bernie to his base on the day that he announced his candidacy, and we apply the same filter, we can see that the framing of that communication and the framing of the entire campaign was more about creating that bigger us, if that makes sense, that kind of this sense of a wider group of people all fighting for the same thing, as opposed to the candidate who wanted to win success. Because how we speak and sound really, really matters. My pals and London-based agency Forward Action talk about this brilliantly, and they talk about organizations that have vertical or horizontal framing. So vertical framing is, we, the organization, are going to change the world, take this action to help us do it. And a horizontal framing, which is the one that kind of is really important to a digital mobilization approach, is we can only solve this problem working together, and here's how you can have impact, because it kind of creates that bigger sense of community around the issue. And it's really important you have an active tone of voice. You know, we're communicating to elicit a response, so we need to make it clear what we want to happen. And when framing and telling stories in a mobilization approach, everything should build from our movement story. And our movement story is the kind of copy platform that we've all agreed internally, which identifies the problem and the solution, is super clear on the plan that we are going to follow to get there, but also at the same time clearly articulates the blocks, whether they be institutions, people, laws, the kind of enemy in terms of however that's framed, but also something which kind of leans into that horizontal framing and creates the big us. It's the copy that you would be using to drive inspiration and ultimately participation in your cause. So I want to show you Greenpeace because I think they're brilliant at this. This is Greenpeace UK, not Greenpeace Global, though I'm sure Greenpeace Global are equally brilliant. Greenpeace have a kind of digital engagement strategy which has really big moments like the moment that they ran this kind of animated film narrated by Emma Thomas. I was involved in its kind of the strategy that sat behind it, and I know that we achieved huge reach. There was, you know, a really decent budget put behind it to make sure that lots of people saw it. But what Greenpeace do brilliantly is, even the biggest moments, they drive people towards the spaces on the internet where people can take an active step toward participation. Reach is not enough. some form of measurable engagement is absolutely at its core. And they also do the same thing, kind of these, they have these everyday moments as well. So if you were to drop yourself onto Greenpeace UK's Facebook page today, you would see that they are an organization that puts a lot of content out. And they put a lot of content out because they know very well how Facebook works. And the more engagement that you can create with your posts, the more people you can reach with your posts online, the more measurable engagement that you can create with your content creates the moment where you can reach much bigger audiences via your advertising programs. And if you are interacting with Greenpeace content, it's very likely at some point you'll see an ad from Greenpeace asking you to do the thing that Greenpeace do brilliantly, asking you to sign a petition or a hand raiser, which is, again, beautifully optimized. It's all designed around response to move you from showing a level of interest in the organization to joining up and being on their email list. And these tactics work brilliantly at scale for Greenpeace. I was at a recent webinar listening to Greenpeace talk about their email program, where it was mentioned that their email file has grown from 500,000 to 1.5 million over the last 7 years. And that's because they have this approach on like everyday, always on supporter attraction, as well as making sure that their big moments are also driving people towards the place where they can communicate with them. And that's email. So if you're on the Greenpeace email list, you will get regular email. You'll get a lot of email. I think in that same webinar, they talked about sending a full list email at least once a week. So that's a lot of people reached every week via their email program. So you get regular email, you get emails which are really focused on one topic per email. There's only ever one ask in an email. They don't use that newsletter approach. And there's a real balance of kind of hard and soft asks. So I may be asked to make a donation. I may be asked to kind of share a new campaign action or film that they've produced, but their comms always feel very timely and very relevant. And of course I don't open them all, but every one that I open, it seems I eventually end up taking some kind of action from it, or it being written in a way that makes me feel proud to be a Greenpeace supporter. I want to talk very briefly about rapid response, then I'll just end with some kind of key points, and then we'll be taking your questions. I think rapid response is really critical to mobilization approaches because world events can drive re-engagement and kind of ongoing success for your brand. And one example I wanted to show was Donald Trump being really quite horrid about 4 congresswomen in the US, telling them basically to go back to the countries from which they came. And he put it out in the tweets. That's how he used to run America by Twitter. So on July the 15th, he sent these tweets, and then UK group Hope Not Hate that very same day put an email out to their list where they were basically asking their supporter base to sign an open letter of solidarity to the 4 women that Donald Trump had been racist about. Went out very quickly, went out the same day, and the call to action was a very simple one. Click from the email onto the landing page, like really well designed. You can see the letter that you're about to sign. You sign up. I signed up because I'm on their list and I thought he was a racist. I get asked to share, so I share, why not? And then it goes into Twitter, very well designed, lots of things thought about. The reason I bring it up is talking to the campaigns director of Hope Not Hate. He said that it was something they felt they had to do because they were angry and they knew their supporters would be angry too, and they wanted to give their supporters something useful to do. But also it wasn't a strategy to grow their email list, but as a consequence of this attention, they grew their email list by 5,000 new subscribers in a very short period of time. So really great way of growing the email list. And Bernie did something very similar. He was talking at an event. The bird landed on his podium. The crowd goes wild. Within hours, the digital team at the Bernie Sanders digital team had an email out to their base giving you the opportunity to get your Bernie Sanders sticker, with the birdie sticker, with any contribution made that day. So key principles of digital mobilization before we end. I think it's important to think about digital mobilization as a model to be testing, as opposed to a kind of tactic or a campaign to be testing. This is a kind of mindset shift. It's not creative or a campaign design. It's about how do you fuse your values, missions, and goals together with action and response. You know, it's not a thing to test once and then reject if those initial results aren't great. It's a kind of a thing to work at, to test, to optimize, and repeat. What's critical is that you have a very clear and well articulated movement story. So you really do need to have a public facing kind of copy platform that enables you to deliver consistent comms, which have always got people within that kind of theory of change. What's central to mobilization is this concept of your vision and your values being up front every time, and having very clear strategy or strategies to mobilize the public behind those values. How do you move people from kind of being aware of you to taking action? Clearly articulated, very simple joiners propositions. You know, simplicity is key here, and testing lots of different things is important. Give careful consideration to your useful and valuable things to do. Every organization I work with says they don't have enough stuff for people to do. Then we do a workshop, and then we discover we've got loads of stuff that people can do. This is digital mobilization. So this is whole concept of being absolutely brilliant at the digital basics. So, well, that's when I say it's not this kind of the creative campaign moments. It's about understanding your digital ecosystem and improving your performance every single day. This one team radical collaboration approach is super, super important. So shared goals, budgets, and working practices are really, really important to making this type of thing work. So I've got a horrible feeling you'll be hearing my voice in your sleep tonight, but that is the presentation element of today. And I'd love to take questions.
Brilliant, Paul. That was so useful. Thank you. There's some really good questions actually coming in the chat. Maddie or John, any questions that stand out for you in the chat that we want to pick up first? It seemed like a good starting point. Pick up them all as well, just to see.
I think there's a nice one from Ab about what a believable goal would look like. So I think Ab, you talked about something can be very short term, but then you actually achieve it and then you run out of steam. So finding that balance.
Yeah, I can see that one. I think I think the point I'm trying to make is I've seen lots of organizations where their theory of change is very complex and very dense, and very little consideration has been given to how we're going to use our theory of change or our movement story, or however we articulate it, as a way to inspire. In far too many cases, it feels like it's something that's an internal focused document or plan, and that if we share that with the public, then we could turn them off. Whereas when I work with groups that have spent a lot of time trying to kind of nail that, it's about taking that kind of 500-page policy document down to 2 or 3 pages of copy, which help your mobilization teams, your digital teams, all teams that are facing the public, deliver, communicate that plan really, really clearly and simply. And that's not to be reductive. That's not to kind of dumb things down. It's how do we, maybe it's a copywriter, maybe it's getting a really good copywriter on staff to make it a public facing document. Yeah, 500 pages, I've read it. It's intense.
Yeah. One that we actually skipped over because it came in really early in the chat was from Chris about, obviously we're seeing screen time trends have just gone through the roof, and will that continue, or do you think people might want to actually return to non-screen based activity?
I don't think it can continue. I mean, this is a personal opinion, not based in data. I don't think it can continue at the levels we've we've seen it. I think there's going to be a natural adjustment. I think the point I would really like to make is if maybe it feels like too obvious a point to make, but the pandemic and our kind of our interaction with digital has been a real moment. There's not been a kind of incremental impact. There's just been this huge moment where more people are aware of it. Well, you know, you should never talk about your own experiences, but I'm going to. Like, I'd never had a Zoom call with my mum, ever. And now, so I used to phone her at 7 o'clock every Sunday night. We'd have a chat for half an hour. Dad would pick up the phone. Oh, do you want your mum? And then I'd speak to mum. Now I have a weekly Zoom call with my mum and dad who sit on the sofa and they both talk to me. It's just changed the way that we communicate, me in London, them in the Southwest. And I just know that that's happened across lots and lots of families. So where I think we reject screen time in the kind of working context, I think, you know, in the wider community, I think there's been a bit of an embracing of it. I can't move at the moment for Facebook portal ads on the telly, which if Facebook is spending money on it, it probably means they've spotted that it's a real trend.
Alison, do you want to jump in? You had a question about mobilisation and community organising.
Yeah, that was really interesting, Paul. There's lots for me to then think about. I work for Shelter Scotland, but one of the things that I'm trying to think a lot about is how to join up mobilisation and community organising in quite a succinct way. And you talked about silos and breaking those down, and that's something I'm trying to sort of put thought to. But I wonder if you had any really good examples of an organisation or charity that you feel are doing that really well.
Yeah, I do. There's an organization which I draw continual inspiration from in the States called Indivisibles. And Indivisibles were an organization that was set up in the aftermath of Trump. And basically, it was set up by a couple of ex-Capitol Hill staffers who knew the tactics and the things that people could do that would have the biggest impact with elected representatives. So they wrote this thing called the Indivisible Playbook, and it caught the public's imagination. And the long story reduced as much as possible is that a couple of years later, there are 6,000 groups in the US, quite active Indivisibles group. So the organization is providing branding, resources, policy targets, all of those things. But these self-organizing groups and community who subscribe to the central view that Trump needs to go are then kind of working to those policy objectives and kind of organizing themselves locally. And I've not really seen anything like that in the UK. And like I say, I draw a huge amount of inspiration from it. And then from a UK perspective, I just think, and I'm sure it's a thing that you've considered, it's just that real big rise of kind of mutual aid at the beginning of COVID, lots of informal groups reacting in a way that established charity brands couldn't. And I just think we really do need to study those groups long and hard and figure out how we, as the established charity space, can interact more authentically with those types of groups, because I think that is a route to change personally.
Yeah, I think, and just I guess in the kind of point of Shelter Scotland, one of the things that I think Shelter's always done well as an organisation, and particularly in Scotland, is offering people something alongside that ask that they make. So things like, so when the letting fee legislation changed, and being able to, you fill out a simple form, and suddenly you've got a solicitor's letter where you can give it to your letting agency and get your letting fees back. But tied into that, being able to sign up for a campaign around fairer housing. And I think there's something that Shelter does really well in that, and actually that others in the room should be thinking about, is not just, someone made a comment on this in the chat box, is not just making continual top-down asks to people, but like, what are you going to do for people? And that thing you do might be, Paul's point about you're gonna help them achieve something they're passionate about, but the thing you might do might be something really practical, like, I'm going to get my letting fees back, but now I'm on board with your broader campaigns.
Yep.
And I think a lot of charities, it's so much about, what do we want to do as an organisation, not what does that individual want to achieve? And that's the bit where they miss that connect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a great opportunity for a UK charity, and I've talked to a lot about this and nobody thinks it's a good idea, but I'll drop it into this to see if anyone does think it's a good idea, is if you, the charity, invested time and energy in showing people, training people, giving them the confidence on how to be a more active participant in their local community or in the kind of wider wider political situation, and kind of gave them the tactics and gave them the training on how to do that, you would get a benefit from the people that you brought to your brand to train them, as well as them being more active citizens more generally. And then we know that all causes and all campaigns are connected in some way eventually. I just think there is a real opportunity there for a group to build on the public's participation in change. I think we as brands think that we know best, and therefore all we need is the public's voice at critical moments or their money. And I think the way to real change is changing that model, and like you say, Ross, giving people things to do which deliver on their belief system, but also help them in the situation that they're in.
Thanks,
That's
Paul.
a great point, Paul. I think Claire had a question that related quite closely to that, was about how you get leadership to understand that people aren't just a means to an end. Like, about having that internal conversation, I guess, and saying, treat people as, people who are valuable in their own right, not just
Yeah. I think it depends. I think it really depends on what level leadership we're talking. I think I've yet to meet a CEO who doesn't believe that people could have a more active role to play in the organization delivering on its mission. I think where the challenges come with leadership are around the structures that we've built up over time, which are, the structures we've had since charities were kind of formed or became very focused on public engagement, probably in the late 80s, around the different functions and the different silos which we have created. And I think the real leadership is to figure out how do you, as we move forward from where we are today, I passionately believe that in order to remain relevant, charities, civil society, campaign groups need to find more space for people in their structures, for the public in their structures. So you can continue with your siloed mentality, which is a separate comms team, a separate fundraising function, and a separate advocacy team that have these kind of slightly conflicting objectives. Or the leadership, I think, is to future gaze a little bit and see what people want and make sure that you structure your organizations to do that. And that doesn't mean that everyone suddenly loses their job. That just means that we use skills in a slightly different way.
That's great.
There's a really interesting question about demographics, and now I'm going to have to scroll up to actually find it. Give me a second. Karen, it was your one. Do you want to unmute and just quickly answer?
Yeah, I was just really wondering, just in terms of, the graph that you had showing like the scale of people going online and how that big jump and you said yourself, the Zoom calls with your parents, that there are a lot of people who are new perhaps to using like digital kind of devices and going online. And if there was, a way when you're thinking about mobilisation of maybe tackling age groups in a different way, or just really kind of it's an interesting thing to think about in terms of the approach, and if there's varying ways to do it.
Absolutely, and I think it's a really important consideration. All of the data and all of the reports that I consume, I think the Ofcom reports come out recently, which is a big study on digital uses and digital behaviours. All of the data points say that digital maturity or the use of digital is growing in pretty much every age demographic. There is the problem in the UK and probably everywhere in the world about this kind of, and we've seen that in the pandemic as well, there are kind of communities or sections of our communities where that don't have access to the internet and don't have access to digital tools, which is something we all need to really worry about. But when it comes to these mobilisation approaches, I am constantly surprised, how to frame this without sounding rude, at the kind of the full range of people across the age spectrum who sign up to campaigns and take action. And I think there've been some quite big moments in the last year which have really driven that. And one of the big moments, whenever I look at the data, is that moment where Dominic Cummings drove to Barnard Castle. And some of the people I know who work in politics were talking to me about how MPs were suddenly getting hundreds of emails about an issue, and they were clearly not pre-populated emails kind of being organized by charity brands or campaign groups. They were written by citizens who were outraged, who had taken the step of finding the email contact details and making that connection. There was just that real kind of moment of kind of, okay, well, this isn't just young people, this is people across the whole constituency who are engaging on that issue. And then it was repeated later in the summer when Marcus Rashford ran his campaign about child food poverty. Again, another spike in communications to MPs really made them stand up and pay attention. It's those types of signal which I see, which make me realize that we're not going to kind of hockey stick back down towards where we perhaps were, or the trajectory that we were on, and that there has been some kind of change in how society is interacting with these tools. So I think it's a great opportunity, and Marcus Rashford and that Barnard Castle moment have kind of given me the data for it. It's a very interesting search you could do. Go to Google Trends, look at the UK, and type in "write to your MP" as the search term, and you will see a massive spike in searches around the Barnard Castle Rashford moment last year. Really should put that in my presentation, to be honest.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, that's really interesting. John, any final questions?
I had one that I'm just going to shove in because it's my chances. I think an experience I've seen in campaigning organisations is people like driving campaigns. They've been doing it for a really long time, so it's really hard for them to remember what it was like to start being concerned about an issue. And it's interesting the point you just made about people like writing in their own words, and that's a kind of a sort of a moment of awakening, I guess. And I wonder if you have any strategies or ideas to kind of have that conversation internally and say there are new people totally new to us, and we need to be able to relate to them in an open and welcoming way.
Absolutely. I think we are guilty as a sector of being slightly snooty about low bar actions when it comes to digital actions. There's a kind of, this is the debate that often rages is, well, it's not meaningful, it won't bring around the change, which is in some cases probably true. But what we're constantly looking to do is attract new people, attract people who can help us deliver on our goals, attract people who believe what we believe, because a mobilization approach fundamentally believes in the power of the mass. So the more people that you can attract using those low bar micro acts of solidarity, the bigger the base you have to communicate with over a longer period of time about the more complex things that you need to do. Not every email sign-up box needs to be a petition or an open letter. It can be an expression of your values. And I think people, it sounds really harsh, but maybe just need to get over it and think about the public and not the internal prejudices or debates that happen within organizations. If people want to express their values online and we give them the opportunity to for them to show that they share our values and it works, let's do it, because more people means more change more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you, Paul. We probably have time to squeeze in one last quick question. I know some of us have to go at 11. We've got to that magic time where some of us might have other meetings. I know somebody said they had 7 meetings, but we've probably got time for 1 or 2 more if you wanted. People are having a think. And there's been so many really interesting insights, Paul. It's been a really interesting talk and discussion. Thank you for that. And Paul's offered to connect in chat if you want to do that. So that's right there. Ross, any wrap-up thoughts from you?
I mean, I think we could have probably gone on for hours today of
Yes.
people of thinking about this. I think, like, just echoing Paul's point about like not being down about those micro interactions. I think it's a really, really important point. And actually, as for those of you working in organisations, is almost just that ability to just get over yourselves as an organisation is like an amazingly liberating thing. It's not easy, but once you can do that, I think that frees you up to think about what do we actually want to do, where are we free of these structures. And particularly for those of you, I mean, like, I know some people in the room who are membership organisations, is thinking about what is your role in that space. So what's your role to help disparate charities come together for a common cause and actually remove some of those politics around it, and where do you sit centrally within that? So yeah, no, amazing stuff, Paul. Thank you so much.
Can I say one last thing before we go?
Go for it.
Please do.
One of the things which I think shows that organizations are really on the right path is this concept of movement generosity. It's an organization has got to the point in its development around its mobilization strategies or its public engagement strategies where it is very happy to signpost its supporters to the campaign of another campaign group, because very few organizations feel that level of confidence, because we've been brought up and we've built our programs around this kind of advertising marketing mindset. But if we really want to drive change and we see one of the people who exist in our ecosystem doing something that we're not doing, I think is a real positive sign when an organization can signpost its own supporters towards somebody else's campaign.
Yeah,
and I'm here for
that's
that.
a really good point. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Cool.
That's
Okay,
great.
cool.
And I think that's also a brilliant point about digital as well, because you can be involved in multiple activities. There's loads of chances to participate without having to be all around the place. Jane in chat has reminded us that we will be having a Digishift next month. We're going to send out details of the speaker and topic when we have them, but that'll be very soon. So as always, it's the last Wednesday morning of the month. And great thanks to Paul again for joining us and for packing so much insight into a small piece of time. We really appreciate it, and thanks all very much, and we'll see you again soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. See you all soon. Cheers.
Bye.